Awaken was a psychological thriller and a semi-experimental short film. When I finished it in March of 2020, I figured it is what it was, and I never planned to do a sequel. However, one of my oldest friends, Gabe Turner, came to me and said, "Hey, I really like this, you should do a follow-up series of some kind." It sounded interesting, so I wrote down a few ideas, put it up on the bulletin board, and I just sat on the idea for the next few years. I wrote a couple screenplays and tried to produce a documentary, none of which ever got off the ground. But in November of 2021, my friends Austin Schmidt and Dylan Listener came together, and over the next year we tasked each other to write and produce our own short films for each of us. I came back to the idea of doing a follow-up series on Awaken, and came up with Awakening, the series. As ideas started rolling in, I started writing scripts for the first episode. Shortly thereafter, I ultimately decided to scrap the idea of doing a series, and a lot of shows nowadays are unnecessarily padded, and I didn't think I could stretch the ideas I had and spread them across a 5-episode series that I had originally envisioned. So I decided to just make a longer short film. Given the length of the short film, I put extra emphasis on the narrative structure of the film. So I estimated the film to be about 30 minutes. It ended up being 34 minutes. First 5 minutes is when the plot starts. First 10 minutes it has to hit this mark. 15 minutes is when the second act starts. 25-ish minutes is when the climax starts, and so on and so on. The challenge for me was finding the hook of the film, while also trying to fit in within the confines of the first film, such as the original Jason played by Dylan Listener. What if it turns out he wasn't the real Jason? And once I came up with that idea, the rest of the story pretty much wrote itself. I thought it would have been weird and kind of boring for Michael to go through this journey alone, so I decided to give him a sister, Ashley. That way we could give him a little bit more character development. By spring of 2022, I had a first draft, and we workshopped it for another 6 months, did 2 more drafts, and by that point I started to get excited again, and this officially kicked off pre-production, and we set a tentative date for February 2023 to begin production. But then, tragically, our friend Austin Schmidt passed away at the beginning of 2023. It was a really sad time, and I realized I was not in the right headspace to make a short film of this kind. So I figured the best thing for me to do would be to put it on the shelf and come back to it later in the year. About 6 months later, I made another short film called Binaural, which was another sort of experimental short film. It was just something I needed to make to get back into the swing of things in order to bring Awakening to life. Thus, pre-production was officially back on, and we set a tentative date of December 2023. Phase 1 of production was filming all the scenes with just me playing the main character, Michael, with the great Dylan Listener as my DP, of course. We got all the downtown shots, all the house shots with just me and everything. Phase 2 officially started February 9th, 2024. This is when the cast started to come into the picture. Susanna Briscoe, Colin Foyle, Grace Gurr, and Peyton Ullman, as well as returning faces Jake Goldfarb and Brandon Dale. The doctor's office scene was the first time Susie and Grace and myself ever met in person. We shot it at my local recreation center, which for my longtime viewers out there, you may recognize this location from a Star Wars fan film I did as a high school project. Although the scene in Awakening was a little bit better tailored for this location than a lightsaber fight. I tried to get permission to film in a simulation lab at a local university. The cost of doing that would have taken a huge chunk out of the budget I had set for this film. Given that it was only one scene for one day of shooting, it just didn't make sense to me. For the recreation center, I decided to try and build a mock doctor's office set. I bought a bench from Facebook Marketplace, propped it up on bed risers, and draped some wax paper over the top of it, and there you go, a patient exam table. I got a scrub shirt, stethoscope, and pen light for Susie. I think she did a good job, but there were two things that I was not satisfied with this location. The lighting and especially the audio. It was extremely echoey. I tried to fix it in post, but ultimately we decided to just redub the scene later. The next day of shooting, February 10th, was the pinnacle of low-budget filmmaking. We only had one day with Jake Goldfarb, and we were on a tight schedule with Grace. And on top of that, we were also fighting a pretty bad wind chill that day. Fast forward a week where we filmed the bridge scene, the memorial scene, and the hospital parking lot scenes. The cold had bothered us before, but we were not ready for what was coming this day. It was one of those days that didn't seem that cold, but after a few hours I realized, oh man, I can't feel my toes. And I had multiple layers on, but it never occurred to me to wear 2 layers of socks. It was so cold, the camera's battery completely drained, both of them. And we only had 2 batteries. Luckily, I brought a second camera as a backup. It got so bad that Dylan almost got frostbite. We were working around everybody's schedule, including Brandon's. I told him to show up between 9 and 12. I planned the whole day to where when Brandon shows up, we stop everything and get all of his shots so we can send him on his way as soon as possible. By some miracle, we managed to get all the bridge shots, though we did end up going behind schedule because of the weather setbacks. We broke for lunch, but Dylan had to go to work that day, so that just left me and Grace to finish the day. We drove out to the country where we set up a roadside memorial for Jason. In the original script, it was supposed to be a tombstone, but I couldn't get a decent tombstone prop in time for the shoot day. So I figured the next best thing was a roadside memorial. It was just a couple of 1x2 screwed together, painted white with some stick-on letters, which never actually stuck to the wood, so I ended up having to tape them, which is why some of the letters look really crooked. Traditionally, roadside memorials do have photos of the deceased person, but at the time of filming that scene, we actually didn't have a Jason cast yet. I really have to hand it to Grace Gure big time. Working with me one-on-one when we didn't really know each other that well, we filmed in her car. She even had to pull focus for a couple of the shots we did. Once we finished the country, we had about 5 more shots to get. But as fate would have it, snow. We managed to get some shots like Grace running out of the hospital and where Michael learns who the real Jason is, but the snow was coming down too hard too fast, so we packed up and called it a day and decided to pick up those shots later. In the original script, Michael was going to be the one who ran out of the doctor's office, and he was going to run all the way to Jason's apartment, where we would then meet Jason's mother, who therefore would have given Michael the photo of the real Jason. And that's how he got his memory back. That never sat right with me. It just felt like a deus ex machina. A character that we've never seen or heard of give such vital information to the main character. It just seemed like cheap writing. Not to mention, if Michael doesn't remember who the real Jason is, how does he remember where the real Jason lived? Which I suppose you could find ways to interpret that, but ultimately I decided to have Ashley be the one to give Michael the photo and give her character a little more importance to the story. March 1st, this was the last day we had with Grace, and it took place entirely in Michael's apartment. We were filming in a 9 to 5 time slot, so we had to get every shot for that day. We covered the windows with blackout trash bags, and I was shocked with how well that worked. After we broke for lunch, Dylan again had to go to work, leaving Grace and I to finish all the daytime stuff ourselves. Her contribution to this film cannot be understated. She really was the saving grace of Awakening, pun intended. If I had to do it over again, I would have tried to have had 2 separate days, one day for night shots and one day for day shots, because towards the end we were really rushing to get the final shots done, and I think the quality suffered a little bit because of that. And with that, that was a wrap on Grace. Mid-March came and we had Jason and Sarah cast, finally. Given that this was a flashback, I was given the liberty to trim my beard, which was a huge relief. I had to grow it out because I needed to look shabby. Unfortunately, we had another problem. This was on Easter weekend, and Dylan, my DP, was going away that weekend to visit family. I asked around to see who could help, and lo and behold, it ended up being Brandon Dale to the rescue. We got his last shot by the lake where he's running to go save Michael, even though it's a completely different location. And there's not even a lake there. It was just over by the church where we filmed the argument scene with Jason and Michael. And we got everything shot with Colin and Peyton. After everything was done, we still weren't done. The lake scene was the very last thing we had to shoot, but I was struggling to find the right location. But finally, I found a solid fishing lake just about 30 minutes from where I live, and well, the rest is history. Awakening was by far the hardest film I've ever made, and quite the learning experience. I'd be lying if I said it turned out exactly the way I had hoped it would. Not that it ever does. I would have liked to have had the shots to have been a little bit more dynamic. Personally, I felt it was a little bit of a step backward compared to Awaken, and I wish I had focused more on directing the actors, also coordinating with the camera operation, as well as being the director. There are those who can pull it off, but it's not my thing, which is why I will never be the main character in any of my films again. Making this movie resulted in a great amount of stress and anxiety on my part, being that it was a new experience for me as a filmmaker. Overall, though, I am still satisfied with how the film came out, and it was a good step forward, and I couldn't have done it without any of the cast and crew, for which I'm eternally grateful for them. We had never met each other, now we have new friends and new connections. And they came together and helped make this film what it was, and can't thank them enough for that.